Good morning and welcome to the ABC's coverage of the Anzac Day March through the centre of Sydney. I'm Miriam Corua. Well, it has been a remarkable lead up to Anzac Day this year, with COVID restrictions being slowly relaxed and public opinion weighing in to make the march today almost the same scale as previous years. Once again, our veterans will begin at Martin Place and head south along Elizabeth Street, past the historic Supreme Court buildings, and seating set aside for veterans and war widows at St James Road. As they continue along Elizabeth Street, participants will direct their eyes left as they pass the Anzac Memorial. In Hyde Park, as an act of remembrance, the march will finish at Liverpool Street, where the formations will disperse. And I'm joined by the Senior Curator and Historian at the Anzac Memorial, Brad Manera. Did you think that we'd be seeing the march in its full glory like today, Brad?
Not after last year. I was really surprised, and tragically my home state in WA is just locked down, so this is remarkable. Sydney turning on the weather and a big march contingent this year, at least 6,000 marches. But then it changes every year. 100 years ago, we were coming out of an influenza pandemic, and they shut down the march completely in 1919. In 1920, there was all of the social distancing that we're so familiar with. So it changes every year. You know, we've now moved back to Elizabeth Street from George Street, and which is, I think, a great outcome, because Elizabeth Street and Hyde Park has been the site of military commemoration in this city for well over a century. So it's a statement by the community, you know, by the veterans and by their families. It's just working.
It is beautiful to have it. And a short while ago, some of our oldest veterans, those survivors of World War II, arrived in a cavalcade of taxis escorted by police and were greeted by current serving members of our Defence Force. So it is great to see that those World War II veterans are able to come along and join us again, especially because of last year as well, the 75th anniversary, but not able to march.
That's right. And I mean, this year, indeed, on this day, it's the 80th anniversary of the final collapse of the Greece and Crete campaign. Well, the Greece campaign, at least. 80 years ago, the Australians were fighting for their lives on the beaches outside Athens, and Alf Carpenter, I hope he's marching this year up in Newcastle, will be remembering what he was doing 80 years ago this day.
Let's now bring in the other members of the commentary team joining Brad and I for our coverage today. We have Eamon Hamilton, who's a Public Affairs Officer with Air Mobility Group at RAAF Base Richmond. He's also a member of the RAAF Specialist Reserve in the newly re-established number 464 Squadron. Eamon, welcome to the coverage today.
Thanks for having me back, Mary.
We also have Georgina Whelan, who is the ACT Emergency Services Agency Commissioner. And Georgina was enlisted in the Army in 1985, a year after she finished school. Georgina, it is great to have you with us as well in the commentary team today.
Good morning, Miriam. It's a very exciting day indeed.
And of course the weather is wonderful for the march as it gets underway, and we see that vanguard moving through as the march commences.
Yes, as we can see, we didn't have the march last year, of course, due to COVID-19 restrictions. But today we can see a smaller crowd than usual to keep in line with the current health restrictions, but some very excited participants and members of the community watching the parade go by.
So we're beginning here with the Royal Australian Navy Band, which is administered by HMAS Cuttable. It consists of approximately 50 full-time members under the musical direction of Lieutenant Brian O'Kane and Drum Major, Chief Petty Officer, musician Grant Metcalf.
And the band does play a vital and high-tempo role in providing regular ceremonial support to all of New South Wales naval establishments. The RAN Band Sydney actively supports the Royal Australian Navy at sea and on the international stage.
as the band members continue to deploy on HMA ships and on the ground overseas, supporting ADF operations and deployment, as well as providing international representation across the globe.
Of course, this band does maintain a very close relationship with the New South Wales community. And in addition to its ceremonial commitments, performs at a variety of public events throughout Sydney and New South Wales. This includes, but is certainly not limited to, school concerts, workshops, community musical festivals, local commemorative services, supporting veterans, the RSL, and many charity events and the national sporting events throughout Australia.
It's great to see such a beautiful turnout for them. The weather is shining, and we do see some people there lining the streets, waving flags. It's a beautiful morning to see everyone gathering and commemorating.
I'm getting a glimpse of Ray James, the head of the RSL New South Wales, and Ray said, you better make sure that you're mentioning that I'm marching with my son Paul, and a veteran of East Timor and Operation Resolute, and he's very proudly marching with his grandson Harrison Whelan, who's just graduated from HMAS Watson. So Ray will be very, very pleased to have the family banner.
Coming along now, we can see the musicians of the Australian Air Force Cadet Band for New South Wales. Not only is this year the centenary of the Royal Australian Air Force, there's a couple of other anniversaries occurring at the moment, with the 80th anniversary of the formation of the Australian Flying Corps, the Australian Air Force Cadets rather. They were originally formed as the Air Training Corps as a means of training young men during the Second World War before they were eligible to join the Air Force. And they now provide youth engagement and activities for their members today across Australia.
Yeah, wonderful to see. The band is made up of some cadets who are aged from 12 to 18. We can see a young cadet there holding the number 2 while they march through on the street there. And as you mentioned there, of course, having a role in playing at major ceremonial events such as at Government House, and also the RAAF base at Richmond for dignitaries such as the New South Wales Governor.
Absolutely. Behind them you can see the Royal Australian Air Force contingent. Normally we'd be later in the program, but this year being the centenary, we've been allowed to march as the leading service. The contingent today is being led by Air Vice Marshal Joe Iovasi. He's the Air Commander Australia, which is the head of the operational arm of the Royal Australian Air Force. He works up at RAAF Base in Glenrook on the edge of the Blue Mountains. Behind him, I believe we can see the Headquarters Air Command contingent. That's also at Air Command at Glenrook. The Royal Australian Air Force was formed on the 31st of March 1921. Before that, it was the Australian Flying Corps, whose banner you can see coming up behind them. They served during the First World War before being disestablished and re-raised later at Point Cook as the Australian Air Corps, becoming the Australian Air Force in March 1921 and later being bestowed the Royal title. Over the last century, more than 350,000 Australians have served with the Royal Australian Air Force. In that time as well, more than 11,000 have given their lives in service with Australia, with the Air Force.
And such a significant year, as you mentioned there, Eamon, with the centenary being commemorated as well for the Air Force. So a big moment for people to reflect on that.
Absolutely. It's been a little bit difficult with COVID, as many can appreciate, but you know, that number, 350,000 Australians, in all likelihood someone knows someone or has a relative or a neighbour who has a connection to the Air Force, and a very special story to tell as part of that. There we can see the banner of the Spitfire Association just coming in behind the Women's Royal Australian Air Force Association, so I'll probably speak to them first. The Women's Auxiliary Australian Air Force was formed in 1941, so it's their 80th anniversary this year as well. Following the war, the Women's Royal Australian Air Force was formed in 1951, so it's their 70th anniversary as well.
You mentioned family associations. My grandfather flew with 73 Squadron in 43 on maritime patrols, 14 Squadron off WA flying Beauforts, and finished the war with 7 Squadron up in New Guinea, where the Australian-built Beauforts did an outstanding job.
Yeah, he would have been a very lucky man to survive service on Beauforts, that's for sure. And I can see there Iris Terry participating in her very first Anzac Day march. I met Iris on Tuesday this week. She was a tailor with the Women's Auxiliary Australian Air Force during the war at RAF Base Richmond. Previously unaware that she was able to march in the Anzac Day, so it's fantastic to have her coming along with us today. She turns 104 next month.
Yeah, Iris enlisted in the Air Force from Griffith, New South Wales. It's Iris Maud Fitzner on the 13th of April 1944.
That's right. One of 8 siblings, I believe, including a twin, most of whom all went and joined the Army, but she took on a job as a tailor with the Air Force, sewing the uniforms for young men as they deployed out from RAF Base Richmond during the war. Tragically, she lost one of her best friends at Richmond during in an aircraft accident at the base towards the end of the war. There she is. She looks like she is really enjoying that.
It's a wonderful moment.
Isn't it just? I believe that might be Ronald Leckie bringing up the 31 Squadron Beaufighter Association banner. During the Second World War, the Beaufighter, brought out from England and then later produced in Australia, was one of the long-range strike aircraft that we flew throughout the Pacific Theatre, as well as one of the Australian squadrons in Europe. It was a very effective aircraft to be used against ground targets in New Guinea, as well as shipping, as demonstrated during the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, when the Australian and American forces managed to stop a Japanese troop convoy from reinforcing the lines. 31 Squadron, meanwhile, was based in Northern Australia throughout the war, up until it moved up with the line into the Dutch East Indies, also providing long-range strike against ground targets, shipping, as well as even claiming a couple of aircraft shot down as well. So they were very, very active. This year is the 101st anniversary of the Australian Flying Corps and RAF Association, so unfortunately they missed out on their anniversary last year due to COVID, but they're being led today by Ron Glue, who's their state president. There we can see the banner of the 450 Squadron Desert Harassers, who flew Hurricanes and then Kitty Hawks in the North Africa campaign of World War II. I believe formed in Williamtown before they were sent overseas on operations. They were the first squadron in the RAF to be formed under the Article 15 agreement of the Empire Air Training Scheme. Some of the banners following up from the associations for our World War II veterans and relatives coming through, as well as some of the current serving members. Who can we see there? Oh, that'd be Ron. Dr. Ron Horton, and just trying to spot some of the others with the Royal Australian Air Force Bomber Command. During the Second World War, many Australians joined the Air Force and were posted to Bomber Command, serving both with RAF and other Commonwealth squadrons on bomber missions over Europe. Bomber Command had one of the highest casualty rates of a Allied unit during the Second World War, with more than 3,400 Australians killed in service on those missions.
just got a glimpse of Tony Adams off to the right, who was a wireless operator air gunner in Lancasters in 1944-45.
Absolutely. He tells some very interesting stories. It wasn't all bombing missions of targets in Europe. They also conducted resupply operations for resistance fighters.
He did those in Stirlings. How the extraordinary career.
I can't imagine half the things he would have done in Stirlings and Lancasters during the war. It was quite an incredible feat to survive a tour.
And I see here that Ronald Horton, who you mentioned, Eamon, was awarded a French Legion of Honour.
That's right. Ron flew Lancasters with 460 Squadron during his service in Europe. Many people would be aware of 460 Squadron now through the G for George Lancaster that's on display in the War Memorial. .458 Squadron's banner and their members flew Wellington bombers in the Mediterranean. Many people would probably be familiar with the battles of the North Africa campaign, including El Alamein and Tobruk. What many might not be aware of is throughout the Mediterranean, air forces were conducting a campaign against each other's shipping. 458 Squadron flew Wellingtons on anti-shipping missions as well as other strike missions against Axis targets throughout the Mediterranean. Incredible to see Ron still making his way down the street now. There's Tony off to the right.
It is quite a sight to see as they make their way through, and the crowds, of course, have turned out in their numbers, albeit with the COVID restrictions that we still see in place, enjoying the spectacle.
They're coming out of those canyons, you can see now, so hopefully with the sun on their back they'll warm up and be able to move along a little bit quicker. I think everyone's a little bit solar powered at the moment.
Bright but chilly.
That's right. So some of the banners that we can see coming through the RAF Signals group. Again, probably one of the unacknowledged parts of World War II is the signals and other radio units that were responsible for transmitting messages across Australia and out into the Pacific as well, making sure that we were in the right place at the right time doing what we needed to do. We can see at the front there, 3 Squadron Association banner, and their current serving members have come down from RAF Base Williamtown. 3 Squadron was originally formed as part of the Australian Flying Corps during the First World War. Disestablished, it later came to Sydney when the RAF arrived at RAF Base Richmond in June 1925. They were at the base until 1940 when they marched out to serve in North Africa, the Middle East, and then part of the Mediterranean campaign. Being led here today by Wing Commander Matt Harper, who's their commanding officer at 3 Squadron at RAF Base Williamtown. That is a fantastic moustache, I must add.
Resplendent. Everyone is in their finest.
I don't think we're going to see much better today. 75 Squadron, the current serving members are based at RAF Base Tyndall up in the Northern Territory, currently operating the Hornet. They're a squadron with a very long historical record of serving on operations, including New Guinea, flying Kitty Hawks in the defence of Port Moresby in 1942. I can see there at the front the RAF Ubon Thailand, the 79 Squadron banner. Many people might not be aware that during Vietnam and in the 1960s we had Sabre fighters deployed to Ubon, one of the bases in Thailand, providing air defence. Was also able to provide some dissimilar air combat training against the United States Air Force as part of their deployment on operations in Vietnam as well. Sort of like a Top Gun before there was a Top Gun. Speaking of Vietnam, behind them I can see the RAF Vietnam Association banner. Quite a number of RAF units and personnel were deployed on operations into Vietnam, including 2 Squadron Canberras, 9 Squadron Iroquois, and the 35 Squadron and RAF Transport Flight Vietnam with the Caribou throughout from 1964 to 1972.
Yeah, shout out to Bob Treloar, who'll be watching this on television. He was planning to march today. He was mentioned in dispatches with number 9 Squadron flying gunships and in Vietnam, but of course his beloved 3 Squadron have just marched past it. Always, once a fighter pilot, always a fighter pilot, according to Air Vice Marshal Treloar.
And we should give a cheerio to all the veterans who are watching from home or from one of the war veterans' homes. It is always great to have you with us. And a warm welcome to viewers from rural and regional New South Wales who are watching from the many RSL clubs across the state. And we hope you can stay with us right through the morning.
We saw there a moment ago the 37 Squadron Association banner. 37 Squadron's actually based out at RAF Base Richmond in the northwest of Sydney. Currently flying the Hercules. They were formed in 1943 in Victoria before serving across Australia and into New Guinea. Disestablished after the war, they flew missions up to Japan during the British Commonwealth Occupation Force resupply there. They were re-established in 1966 to fly the C-130 Hercules, which they continue to fly today. You'll see the Hercules flying all throughout Australia and on operations overseas as well. Been particularly busy of late on resupply missions for COVID in Papua New Guinea, cyclone relief missions to Western Australia, as well as flood relief missions, I believe, to East Timor. Wherever anything is happening, generally they're the mob that are delivering the response. There's a Black Cats Catalina banner there as well. I think we might have a Catalina flying over Sydney later on this morning from the Historic Aircraft Restoration Society at Albion Park. So keep an ear out for that drone later on this morning.
And we can see the New South Wales Police Band making their way through there. And it's regarded as the state band of New South Wales. It was formed in 1895. New South Wales Police Force proudly boasts the country's oldest concert band.
So some of the remaining elements of the Royal Australian Air Force contingent for our centenary march. I can see number 22 Squadron and RAF Fighter Wing. Number 22 Squadron's had a long association with the City of Sydney, as their banner would suggest. They were a reserve or a citizen Air Force squadron for the longest time. They're now the Base Operations Support Squadron at RAF Base Richmond. Anytime that you see RAF Base Richmond being used for things like firefighting or other emergency services during the recent floods, as a general rule, you'll see that support being provided by number 22 Squadron. Refueling, unloading aircraft, whatever it needs being done is being done by 22 Squadron.
And somebody else who will be watching from home will be Ray Seaver. It's the 70th anniversary of 77 Squadron changing from propeller-driven Mustangs to Meteor jets in Korea. So Ray flew Meteors in Korea in 1953.
I believe yesterday was the anniversary of the Battle of Kapyong as well, so that's...
It certainly is, 70th anniversary of Kapyong. Here comes the Navy.
The Australian Navy.
HMAS Australia, our largest capital ship in the Second World War, with battle honours to the Lingayen Gulf, the campaign in the Philippines.
So we have here the Corrective Services New South Wales Band, which originally formed in 1981 and has been providing essential ceremonial support to Corrective Services New South Wales and the New South Wales Government. And it's led by full-time music director, Deputy Superintendent John Buckley. He was appointed to the role in January 2011. And the drum major, principal musician Andrew Robinson, is the longest serving member of this band, which is celebrating its 40th birthday this year. And the band is very proud to continue its long association with the Anzac Day March. And it sees this as an opportunity to promote professionalism, esprit de corps and morale among the officers and staff there at Corrective Services.
Gentleman there has seen some service. I believe that might be some members of 9th Squadron, which would have been deployed with the RAF in Vietnam, flying Iroquois.
So now we will start to see the Navy elements move through the march today, led by Commander Australian Fleet, Rear Admiral Mark Hammond, who is the Commander Australian Fleet.
And a Submariner.
I did not realise that. Rear Admiral Hammond assumed the position of Commander Australian Fleet in November 2020, so only 3 months into his command. And he joined the Royal Australian Navy in 1986 as an electronics technician, and he was commissioned as a naval officer in 1988 after graduating from the RAN Recruit School. Isn't it fabulous to hear that crowd clapping?
Just at the front there, we can see the Catalina Squadron's banner. Throughout the Pacific, a number of Catalina Squadrons conducted reconnaissance missions against Japanese forces, as well as strike missions on occasion. Catalina had an extremely long range, but was also very slow and very vulnerable to enemy attack. But one of those unacknowledged heroes of World War II were the crews that flew those very long missions.
We had a lot of them flying out of the Swan River in WA, indeed an American patrol wing, but and they kept the Empire Air Route flying, flying from Australia all the way to Trincomalee without stop. But one of the things I meant to point out, the coincidence of Air Force marching past St James, which was the largest public air raid shelter in Australia during the Second World War.
Is that right?
Believe it or not, they practiced air raid precautions here in Sydney from 1941 until 1945, and St James Station played a major role.
I would dare say there's a manila folder with a plan for that station sitting on someone's bookshelf. There we can see the Royal Air Force contingent marching through. The Royal Air Force, obviously the British Air Force to many, was formed in 1918, so they had their centenary quite a couple of years ago now. Many of their members continue to serve with us today, actually, on exchange or rather tours with the RAF, RAF, I should say.
400 Australians flew with the Royal Air Force in the Great War. Were the foundation of the Australian Flying Corps.
Is that right?
And that, of course, is the New South Wales Police Band also making their way past St James Station now.
Police played a major role in the military history of New South Wales. They formed the basis for the Sudan contingent in 1885. A large number of New South Wales policemen joined the Sudan contingent when they sailed off and marched down College Street to the Quay to go off to the first military contingent outside India to fight in one of the Empire's wars.
Long and distinguished history there.
We can now start to see a significant amount of the Navy contingent getting ready to make its way down Elizabeth Street.
It's wonderful to see Canberra and Shropshire's banners marching together. Canberra was lost during the battles at north of Guadalcanal, and the British then gave us a cruiser. The HMS Shropshire became HMAS Shropshire to take over that role, and served with an all-Australian crew with distinction right through to the end of the Second World War. So two very fine Royal Australian naval vessels from the Second World War marching immediately behind the banner for our battle cruiser HMAS Australia.
Yes, HMAS Australia. The group is led by their usual leader, the patron, Commodore Peter Deschanel.
If you saw some of the people in the crowd or in the parade, just in the march rather, looking up at the skies and a odd sound in the background, we just had a fly past from a F-35 Lightning from RAF base Williamtown. So just catching the end of the RAF contingent as they'd be coming past the Anzac Memorial now. I believe that'd be the first time we've had an F-35 conduct a fly past of the Anzac march in Sydney. Normally it's the Hawks from 76 Squadron that come through and do it.
We can see there in a little pause in the march there, the Corrective Services Band of New South Wales, as we see everyone assembling and getting ready to move on. Of course, we can see there the serving members of the Navy also turning out to join in the commemorations there. Obviously, it's great to see everyone back after the year that was.
Absolutely, and we can now see the parade continuing to move on with HMAS Australia leading the way. HMAS Australia was a heavy cruiser, the pride of the Australian fleet, and her battle honours include the Atlantic Sea, the Coral Sea, Savo Island, Guadalcanal and the Leyte Gulf.
Yeah, during the battle at Leyte, she was hit by almost 5 or 6 kamikazes, but she continued to fight, and despite the skipper being killed on the bridge.
Yes, Australia probably fought more actions and steamed more miles than any other ship of the RAN during the war. The Canberra Shropshire Association, as we can see coming through now, led by John Hardiman. The association is made up of men from HMAS Australia's sister ships, Canberra and Shropshire. The Canberra was sunk in 1942 during the Battle of the Savo Island with a loss of 84 lives.
I saw there a moment ago battle honours for the Shropshire in the Atlantic and the Leyte Gulf, and I can't imagine two naval engagements during the Second World War that would have been quite as different as those two theatres.
So yes, we can just start to see the RAN corvettes coming through.
Yeah, we got a glimpse of their banner, and of course this year we've got we had the extraordinary situation where the actions of ordinary seaman Teddy Sheehan, 18 years of age, on board HMAS Armidale in the south of Timor, has been retrospectively awarded the Victoria Cross for Australia.
And there it is, being acknowledged, a remarkable achievement.
Yes, and we can see that Bill is also delighted that Keith Farrow, 96, his old scan Oppo from the 1944 till 1946 on HMAS Glenelg, is still able to march with the corvettes today.
Most of them were built here in Sydney at Cockatoo Island, 60 of them during the war. They were remarkable. The small ship, convoy escort, minesweeper, very versatile vessel. There's also the 70th anniversary of the deployment of Australia's first aircraft carrier going to war, HMAS Sydney, when she sailed into Typhoon Ruth off the Korean Peninsula.
Speaking of which, there's one of her successors.
Indeed.
And there we can see HMAS Melbourne, the Fleet Air Arm Association. Marching together now are members from HMAS Melbourne and the Fleet Arm Association, and they are looking very proud indeed. There have been 3 ships in the RAN named HMAS Melbourne. The second Melbourne was a Majestic class aircraft carrier commissioned in 1955, and that carried the first operational jet fighters in the Australian Navy. Over 15,000 men served during her 28-year service. They've got some tips for young players, I think, on the screen there, getting ready to march.
It is a wonderful moment, and you can see, of course, how much it means for everyone to be a part of today's commemorative march. Even more so after being deprived of the opportunity to gather together last year. Wonderful to see so many turning out and on such a glorious autumn day.
And we can just start to see the Naval Association of Australia just behind HMAS Melbourne. The largest association representing serving and former members of the Navy. It developed a self-help organisation uniting former and serving naval personnel for their mutual benefit. Their motto is each for all for each.
As you mentioned earlier, it's 110 years since Australia purchased a fleet, and in 1911, and we took charge of our first ships in 1913. They sailed through the Heads, and within 12 months they're sailing off to war. So
a very timely decision.
And there we can see the Naval Warfare Officers Association. And leading this contingent is the National President, Commodore Tony Flint, a former commander of the Australian Fleet and Deputy Chief of Navy. His sea commands included HMAS Darwin and HMAS Newcastle, coincidentally his hometown. Yes, and there we can see HMAS Yarra, led by Ray Vidler, Chief Petty Officer, serving on Yarra 3 from 1979 to 1986. So this association represents 4 generations of HMAS ships carrying the name Yarra. The first was a foundation ship of the RAN and served during the First World War.
you can see at the bottom of the banner, lost in action, March 1942. Yarra sacrificed herself to try and save a convoy she was escorting, trying to make it back from Australia after the Battle of Java Sea. I'm sorry.
Got it.
And communicators, the Royal Australian Navy, of course, operating in shore stations all around Australia, making sure that our coastal waters were clear of enemy action during the Second World War, and all of our port activity and our ships at sea were kept well informed. Naval stations here in Sydney played a vital role in defending Port Jackson against the Japanese submarines in 1942.
So let's look out there for the ex-president, Alan Shorty Moffat. I believe he's carrying the flag. We'll look out for him. He joined the RAN in 1955. There he is right there. Can we see him on the bottom right-hand corner? Joined the RAN in 1955 and served on many ships throughout his career, including HMAS Anzac in the Malayan emergency. And of course, we also want to send a cheerio to Don Ferguson, who is 96 years young. He's one of our last surviving World War II convoy signalmen. So there we have the RANs commemorate their 80th anniversary this week, the Women's Royal Australian Naval Service. So in celebrating their anniversary this week on the 18th of April, the Minister for the Navy approved the employment of 12 female telephonists and 2 attendants at the Harman Wireless Transmission Station in Canberra on 18 April 1941. On the 21st of April, a Navy office letter to the Commodore in charge in Sydney authorised the entry of women into the service as RAN. These 14 women began their duty at Harman on the 28th of April 1941, paving the way for the eventual full integration of women into the service. And here we are with the Submariners Association, the New South Wales branch, led by Commodore Jeffrey Anderson, RAN. Jeff Anderson joined the Navy in 1962 as a cadet midshipman. There he is with a big smile on his face at HMAS Creswell, Jervis Bay. After joining the submarines in 1969, he served on HMS Ocelot and then many Australian subs. So the origins of the Australian submarine service began with the commissioning of HMAS AE1 and AE2 in early 1914.
Tragically, we lost AE1 off German New Guinea in 1914 and AE2 in the Dardanelles in 1915. So it was not a great start to the Australian submarine service.
And we can see here the Australian Air League Moorebank Band making their way through the progression there. It's a drum band. It was formed by members from the Moorebank Squadron. Once again, the Australian Air League is honoured to respond to the request of the NRSL and Anzac Day Committee, providing bands and personnel to assist with veterans on Anzac Day. And a very fine moment for them here.
And there we have the RAN Health Services. I've been very privileged to serve with a number of the RAN healthcare professionals throughout my own military career. Very proud moment indeed watching them march down Elizabeth Street today.
There's the banner for HMAS Perth Association. I believe they're being led today by Rear Admiral Chris Oxenbull. Rear Admiral Oxenbull joined the Navy as a 15-year-old cadet and retired 38 years later as the Deputy Chief of Navy. The first Perth was a light cruiser that was sunk in 1942 off the coast of Java with the loss of 350 men. A further 108 men later died in Japanese POW camps. The second Perth was an Adams-class destroyer commissioned in 1966 and in service for 34 years, including 3 deployments to Vietnam.
Hector Waller commanded Perth in the Battle of Bantam Bay and Sunda Straits and went down with his vessel. He distinguished himself in the Mediterranean, commanding the vessels of the Scrap Iron Flotilla. HMAS Hobart just went past at World War II and, of course, gallant service in South Vietnam. And HMAS Brisbane, a destroyer who, again, excellent, outstanding war service during the war in Vietnam, providing gunfire support.
That HMAS Brisbane name lives on today with the air warfare destroyer, which was commissioned in October of 2018.
HMAS Sydney, great name for the Royal Australian Navy. Our first naval victory when she sank the, or destroyed the Emden on Cocos Island in 1914. HMAS Sydney 2 distinguished herself sinking the Bartolomeo Colleone. There's Admiral Ian Crawford, who was on HMS Calcutta in the Korean War during the in 1950, leading the complement from HMAS Sydney. He'll be remembering Sydney number 3 that was an aircraft carrier in the Korean War and then a fast troop transport during the Vietnam War as the Vung Tau Ferry Vendetta, a destroyer of the Royal Australian Navy. Distinguished service as part of the Tobruk ferry during the Second World War, and then a later Vendetta served on operations during the confrontation.
And there we can see the HMAS Darwin Association. HMAS Darwin Association is led by the association's president, Captain Rick Bailey, who was the commanding officer of the ship when it was commissioned in Seattle, USA. The first HMAS Darwin decommissioned in December 2017 after more than 33 years in commission, which included operational service in East Timor and the Middle East. And there we can see the Tingira Australian Association. This contingent is made up of former junior recruits who passed through the naval training scheme based at HMAS Lewin in Fremantle from 1960 to 1984. And then we can see the Australian Mine Warfare Clearance Diving Force Elements Group, led by Commodore Brenton Smythe, who is their patron.
With them is the Clearance Divers Association, the Navy's specialist divers who carry out mine clearance operations and the disposal of explosive ordnance. They work on the mine hunting ships as part of a team or on special operations. Amongst their number include veterans of Vietnam from 1967 to 1972, responsible for searching the hulls of ships for improvised explosive devices.
And we can see coming along here now the Australian Air League City Blacktown Band. And the Squadron Band is the oldest continually operating band within the Air League. Let's take a listen. Should note as well today with the bands, we only have around 20 of them marching this year. Normally we'd have at least 60, so it is great to see that we do have some in numbers here. Of course, it's not quite the same as years past, but great to see the turnout, and of course, such a beautiful day.
Current serving sailors from our senior service, the Royal Australian Navy.
And one digger at the front, I saw.
Yes, we have 200 personnel from Australian Navy's Surface Force Command, HMA ships Canberra, Adelaide, Hobart, Brisbane, Supply and Choules.
There's a banner for defensively equipped merchant ships just went past.
Yes, we have here the Australian Army Band Sydney, and this band is responsible for providing ceremonial support for Vice Regal events, but also musical assistance to the Australian Defence Force units within Sydney and beyond. Let's take a listen, and they are looking splendid as well, sounding wonderful.
The Army's coming into view, and we can see an anti-aircraft contingent, 52nd light anti-aircraft battery. They were a composite unit. You can see the triangular colour patch of Corps troops, and these people served in the Netherlands East Indies, Dutch New Guinea, if you like, part of Merauke Force, providing early air defence if the Japanese air elements tried to attack Port Moresby from the west. (14th Field Regiment), an Australian artillery unit with the Australian Military Forces, not an AIF unit, although all of their members volunteered for the AIF, and so they were able to deploy to the Solomons in the final stages of the Second World War.
It is such a wonderful, proud moment to see so many of our veterans able to make their way through the streets there in Sydney this year. Of course, we have a number of World War II veterans who are joining us. Sadly, last year's 75th anniversary, we weren't able to acknowledge them, so great to see that this year.
Yeah, these gentlemen all wearing the Pacific Star for service in those final campaigns to our near north. I can't imagine what it must have been like to try and operate a 25-pounder gun howitzer in the jungles in the Solomon Islands, but he's providing vital support for the infantry units, fighting those Japanese troops left behind and still a threat to our lines of communication. Second, 4th Armoured, who with their Matilda tanks and operating in the Itaby-Wewak campaign and those final campaigns in New Guinea in 1945. The most unlikely country to operate a tank in, but the 2nd, 4th did an outstanding job. Red and blue, the traditional colours of the artillery, and you can see the various formation signs there. Up in the background, the horizontal triangle, the normally associated with the 6th Australian Division.
It's been fantastic to see so many of the older veterans still able to get out with their units more than 75 years on.
The T-shaped colour patch awarded as a battle honour to the 9th Division for their performance at Tobruk, and I think that was 2nd, 4th Light Anti-Aircraft, an army unit providing air defence for the division.
Again, we can see a wide range of service in some of those banners from Palestine and North Africa through to New Guinea and up into other parts of Southeast Asia during the later stages of the war, which is quite incredible when you think about the difference from going from one theatre to the next during that conflict.
And how quickly they adapted. Initially, the heavy 3.7-inch anti-aircraft guns, but by the end of the war, all of these people were equipped with the 40mm Bofors gun, very effective anti-aircraft weapon, and that was still in use by the Royal Australian Navy until just a few years ago. Really an extensive range of weapons, from searchlights to radar to heavy and then light anti-aircraft ordnance. Vital in the defence of Northern Australia. The Japanese launched over 100 air attacks from Exmouth in the west to Townsville in the east, and then of course against our forces closer to the sharp end, and these were the blokes that were responsible for protecting the men and equipment on the ground.
Great
Just
to
see those smiles.
That's right.
Yeah, a wonderful moment to be sharing with everyone.
Now, have we had the pipers come through this morning?
And we can see starting to make their way through the parade the LCC Southern Cross Pipes and Drums Band. And this band was formed with the City of Bankstown RSL Community Club, and the pipes and drums there in 1992. They have now moved to their current home at the Liverpool Catholic Club, becoming the LCC Southern Cross Pipes and Drums.
So you can see the banner of some of our really vital support units, the light aid detachments and the 2nd, 3rd Field Workshops. Behind them, 2nd Field Regiment, another bunch of gunners, with the 6th Division that served in North Africa, Greece, Crete, and then came back for the war in the Pacific. 2nd, 5th Field Regiment, of course, served in Syria in a campaign against the Vichy French, and the only artilleryman to be awarded the Victoria Cross, Arthur Roden Cutler, who became the longest-serving governor in New South Wales, earned his Victoria Cross as a forward observer with 2nd Field Regiment, 2nd, 5th Field Regiment in Syria. He lost his leg but stayed at the task. 2nd 1st Infantry Battalion, the 1st Infantry Battalion raised in Australia, indeed, for the 2nd AIF in 1939, and a very proud tradition, the senior battalion of the 6th Australian Division, and their first enlistments began in September of 1939, and they played a major role in the first desert push. In 1941, in January, they captured Bardia and Tobruk, and then redeployed to Greece, and they faced the German armoured units in Greece, fought their way all the way back to the beaches in south of Athens at this time, 80 years ago, and then played a major role in the defence of Rhethinon on Crete. A few of their number were able to escape, and they reformed the battalion in Palestine before returning to Australia and finally going into action in the Itaby-Wewak campaign in northern New Guinea. Papua and New Guinea infantry battalions banner marching. These people initially began as scouts for the Australian military forces during the Japanese invasion in Papua, but then played a vital role as part of the Australian Order of Battle right through the Second World War, and their traditions live on with the Papuan infantry, the Pacific Islands Regiment that was still provided the foundation for modern Papua New Guinea's army. Oh, there's Alf Carpenter. Yeah, turned 104 a few days ago.
Wonderful to see that he's been able to join in.
An original member of the battalion, 2nd 4th Battalion, and served right through North Africa, Greece, Crete. Then they commissioned him.
Is that right?
His hat's still in pretty good nick for all that service. He's doing well.
He was a commissioned officer with landing craft in Bougainville in 1945, so he left the infantry, went to the engineers. The 2nd 8th was a Victorian battalion, but this is the 8th Battalion, which was initially a militia battalion, and then every member of the unit volunteered for AIF, and so they deployed to New Guinea and then Bougainville in the final campaigns of the Second World War. The grey border around the colour patch, you can see, indicates that it's converted to Australian Imperial Force. We ran two armies during the World Wars, the Australian Commonwealth Military Forces and the Australian Imperial Force.
And here we have the LCC Southern Cross Pipes and Drums again. Let's have a listen. Now the band there has achievement in state and Australian Championship titles in both Grade 3 and Grade 2. And we have some very young marchers joining us as well today in the parade.
See the diamond-shaped colour patch of the 7th Australian Division in the distance. 7th Division was created from a bit of an overflow from the 6th Australian Division, and they sent a brigade to England. They were there during the Battle of Britain. Quite extraordinary to think that there was an entire brigade of Australians suffering the conditions of the Blitz, and their kookaburra on a boomerang, the divisional sign on their vehicles. And then the 7th Division went on to fight with distinction against the Vichy French in Syria in 1941, and then was back in Australia to play an essential role in the battles on the Kokoda Trail, and from August through to December 1942.
I think Alf might be getting up for a march.
There he goes.
He's out of his chair.
104 years young.
Good on him.
Now that is determination.
That's right.
Alf's the only bloke I've ever seen who was smiling on his paybook photograph.
I would be too if I was getting paid. That's terrific to see.
That's resilience.
That's right.
He's fought Italian infantry, German paratroopers, German armoured units, and Japanese Marines.
Gosh. Had the whole book stamped.
And clearly a sense of humour there still, everyone enjoying that moment.
He's told us he's going to make 117, that's guaranteed.
I'd probably put money on that, Brad.
And some very young marchers as well joining in there today. Wonderful to see people
I doubt she
getting
served with
involved.
Papuan infantry.
No,
but I can
no.
tell you.
And we can also see members of Legacy making their way through the parade, and of course great to acknowledge the wonderful work and support that they've been providing for veterans and families for so many years, continuing to do so, continuing to work there alongside the parade as it gets underway here.
Still a very active organisation today, not just for war widows and those who've lost partners or relatives in past conflicts, but more recent campaigns around the world and supporting their families across Australia.
Certainly a number of young legatees benefiting from the services and the support provided by Legacy.
Absolutely.
There's a brief glimpse of the 25th Brigade, who served with the, there we are, 25th Brigade, again a 7th Division Brigade. 2nd 31st Battalion was distinguished itself in Syria when James Gordon earned the Victoria Cross at the Battle of Murjayoun. As you can see, 2nd 31st, another AIF unit, one of the who joined the militia on the Kokoda Trail to prevent the Japanese advancing all the way to Port Moresby, and then participating in the battles that drove them all the way back to the beachheads on the northern coast of Papua, and the battles of Buna, Gona and Sanananda. These are the battalions of the 25th Brigade, the 2nd 31st and the 2nd 33rd. The two indicates that these men were members of the AIF. They volunteered to serve anywhere in the world, as opposed to the AMF, the Australian Military Forces, who was a largely conscript army that were conscripted for defence of Australia and its territories. So the AIF units had the 2/ or the 2 oblique in front of it, whereas the others that don't have that indicate that they're AMF units. And of course, every division needs its transport. So the 2nd 107th Australian General Transport Company provided motor transport for the men of the 7th Australian Division. Through Syria, New Guinea, and then eventually Borneo, the 7th Division landed at Balikpapan in the Netherlands East Indies in 1945 as part of the Oboe operations.
A couple of people there who've been up since dawn this morning and probably appreciating the opportunity to have a quick kip.
That's right.
First and second pioneers. These are artisans who can fight. They're not Royal Australian Engineers. They provide engineering support for infantry units, but they're also trained in infantry combat capabilities. So they're you find a lot of the pioneer battalions served alongside infantry units in campaigns like Syria and particularly in the Pacific Islands. The machine gun battalions were a hangover from the Great War machine gun battalions to provide sustained automatic weapons fire support for the infantry units, and by the Second World War they usually broke them up and deployed them as companies.
What would they have been using?
Vickers, Crew-served Vickers 303 machine guns. The 8th Australian Division fought an outstanding campaign, usually outnumbered and outmanoeuvred in the Malayan campaign of December 1941, January 1942, but tragically the division had to march into captivity when Singapore fell on the 15th of February 1942, and so they then endured 3.5 years of dreadful incarceration as prisoners of the Japanese, many of them deploying to the Burma-Siam Railway, and others working as slave labourers in Japan and various other work camps around the Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. Second 15th Field Regiment, another AIF artillery regiment, and they were part of the 8th Australian Division. They were providing vital gunfire support for the infantry brigades and battalions like the 2nd 30th Battalion, Blackjack Callaghan's Greyhounds, who fought the Battle of Gamas and Muar River, put up a stout resistance against the Japanese before being outflanked and having to fall back to Singapore Island. So, you know, these people are marching in memory of those extraordinary soldiers of the 8th Australian Division, tragically a very fine combat division that had to march into captivity when Singapore fell.
Yeah, incredible adversity that they would have experienced.
Yeah, places like Hellfire Pass on the railway and at Sandakan in Borneo. Too often remembered for their time as prisoners of war, and not often enough do we recall just how hard they fought in those first battles of the Pacific War. Eight Div SIGs, and providing the vital signal support for the 8th Australian Division, operating in small units attached to making sure the battalions, the brigades, and eventually divisional headquarters could speak to each other. Sparrow Force on Timor. Comprised the Tasmanians of the 2nd 40th Battalion in Western Timor, and the Western Australian No. 2 Independent Company marched into Portuguese Timor, and with obviously support units raised from around Australia. So very appropriate to see them marching in New South Wales. Of course, they best remembered for their stout resistance when the Japanese landed on the 19th of February 1942.
Young gentleman there having a little bit of a hard time keeping in step with the rest of the contingent. I think his old man's trying to...
For some, it's not a march so much as a sprint.
It's really not, no. Having walked that road, it is quite hard to keep step, so I can understand what he's going through.
Well, if he's marching with the 2nd 8th Field Ambulance, one of the frontline medical units that was part of the 8th Australian Division. The 31st 51st Battalion was a militia unit raised during the Second World War, and served initially in northern Papua, and then eventually on to I'm sorry, they didn't make it to Papua. They served in the final campaigns of the Second World War, particularly in the Solomons, and performed with great gallantry in landing behind Japanese lines on Bougainville in 1945.
And we've got here the Northern Suburbs Pipe Band, which was formed in 1952, made up of volunteers who come from all over Sydney's metropolitan area. They're also famous for wearing the Wallace tartan after Sir William Wallace, Braveheart.
Nothing like having the martial sounds of the bagpipes leading in the 9th Australian Division. The 9th Division proudly wearing their T-shaped colour patches, of battle honour awarded to them after their service at Tobruk. They arrived in the Middle East very under-equipped and with very few heavy weapons, minimal transport. The 6th and 7th Divisions thought they were going off to Greece, so they'd leave these youngsters behind to mine somewhere that they thought was going to be safe, a little port city called Tobruk. Of course, the Germans soon changed their minds when they burst into across North Africa in a brand new offensive, and the 9th Division certainly proved that they were as good as their older brothers in the 6th and 7th Divisions.
Yes, Tobruk, it's a name that's etched in memory.
Indeed, the siege was raised in April of 1941, so 80 years ago this month, the 9th Australian Division faced for the first time those German tanks of the 21st Panzer Division laying siege to their troops at Tobruk, but they held out for almost 9 months. Surprisingly similar to a siege-like situation that their parents experienced on Gallipoli 20 years earlier. After the siege of Tobruk, the 9th Division stayed on in the Middle East when the 6th and 7th were brought home, and they became part of the British 8th Army that held the line at El Alamein, and you can see the battle honour for El Alamein on the colours of the 2nd 43rd that just marched past. After El Alamein, they eventually returned to Australia in time to take part in the Huon Peninsula campaign, and then finally served on at Tarakan in Borneo. Second 26th Brigade Group that the 3 battalions with battle honours from Tobruk to Mersa Matruh, to El Alamein, and then through northern New Guinea and eventually Borneo. Second, third pioneers, again, these were infantry combat soldiers, but they were also military engineers. They could perform both tasks. Artisans at war. Second, third of a triangular colour patch because they're corps troops, and so they bounced around a little. They served alongside the 7th Division in Syria and then finished their war as part of the 9th Australian Division.
Very happy, proud moment. Making our way along Elizabeth Street there.
More gunners, 3rd Division artillery. The 3rd Division was one of the militia divisions mobilised in the final for the to support the AIF in the final campaigns of the Second World War. Our 3rd and 11th Divisions saw action in the Southwest Pacific area from the Solomons through to New Guinea, and you can see that map of New Guinea with the New Guinea Volunteer Rifles, some of the first units to face the Japanese. A lot of these people were expat Australians working in New Guinea when the Japanese landed, and of course ANGAU was the Australian New Guinea Administrative Unit.
I believe we might be coming into the end of the World War II contingent, going into the post-World War II Army contingent. I did see Milne Force 1942 at the end there.
And then we can see the Australian Army Training Team Vietnam on our screens at the moment.
First in, last out.
Yeah, the AATTV deployed in 1962. There was only a few dozen of them as part of our joining the Military Assistance Command Vietnam, and they stayed right through. And, as you mentioned, the last of the Australians to be withdrawn were AATTV members that were sent to the Saigon Guard.
And we did see there as well, just following behind Milne Bay, the Australian Air League Riverwood Squadron marching band, their second time through. And they've also represented Australia internationally at performances such as the 2019 Pearl Harbor Memorial Parade in Hawaii back on the 7th of December of 2019. They do a lot of service out there for the community as well.
I believe they're on glockenspiel duty for this parade, for this march.
Yes, a very special honour indeed.
leading Milne force, that vital defence of Milne Bay in August of 1942. Had Milne Bay fallen, it would have been very easy for the Japanese to have interrupted any communications between mainland USA and Australia.
Much less operated out of Port Moresby. It was an incredibly intense campaign, as I recall.
Four members of the Australian Army training team earned the Victoria Cross during the war in South Vietnam. And you can see their banner has the citations from the United States and from the old Republic of South Vietnam.
And we can just sort of catch a little glimpse behind the banners there of the Manly Warringah Pipe Band. They've been for 72 years entertaining the public across the northern beaches of Sydney and proudly been playing in the Anzac Day March every year that it's been held. Honoured again, of course, to be once again part of this important occasion.
We'll quickly mention they've just gone through, but the Korean War Veterans Association was just moved through before. I believe there's an exhibition in Sydney if people are interested. For the Korean War Veterans Association?
Yes, we've just put on an exhibition at the Korean Cultural Centre in memory of the battles of 1951. Just behind the AATTV banner was the Australian Armoured Corps who served in Vietnam, and of course this is the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Long Khan, in which the Royal Australian Armoured Corps Association, or the Royal Australian Armoured Corps in Vietnam, played a major role in the Battle of Long Khan, 1971. The thought of driving a 52-ton Centurion tank around the jungles in South Vietnam is rather remarkable, but they did a great job, and every member of the Royal Australian Regiment will tell you how much they valued Centurion support when confronted with Viet Cong bunkers.
And so here we can see the Royal Australian Armoured Corps Association that was led by Colonel Reb Shoebridge.
Here comes the Manly Warringah Pipe Band, and it's also competed in Australia, New Zealand and Scotland, performing at the Edinburgh Military Tattoo on many occasions as well.
First Armoured Regiment Association, the brown, red and green, through mud and blood to the green fields beyond. Their Mark IV tank and their motto, onward. Followed by the artillery, and the Australian Task Force in Vietnam was supported both by Royal Australian Artillery as well as the New Zealand Artillery.
pipe and drums are really one of those iconic sounds of Anzac Day in Sydney. You can hear the sound just echoing down the canyons through the city.
This first field squadron, the engineers playing a vital role in the war in Vietnam, as you can imagine, with the first really Korea and Vietnam, Australians start to encounter mine warfare on a large scale, and so the vital role being played by engineers in those wars.
And just behind them we can see the Parramatta RSL Caledonian Pipe Band making its way through. And it's a band that has been formed since 1944. Placed in many competitions, and they have traditional full military dress uniform whilst on parade.
Australian Water Transport engineers operating small ships, landing barges, that sort of capability. This is the unit that Alf Carpenter finished the war with, where we saw him march past with an infantry unit earlier, but he finished the war like so many of those veterans who could think like an infantryman but knew exactly how they needed to be best supported by
that
the
vital interface.
It's a chilling inscription on that first field squadron banner. The thought of anybody climbing into an enemy tunnel to find out exactly what they've hidden there is doesn't bear thinking about it.
And yet they did.
Takes a certain courage.
Yeah, certainly. 17 and 21 construction provided engineer support for Australians, particularly during the confrontation, our undeclared war with Indonesia, and then of course in South Vietnam. Not only on military tasks, but as part of civil aid programs as well. Part of winning the hearts and minds of the local population.
And there they are, the Parramatta RSL Caledonian Pipe Band, sponsored by Parramatta RSL Club. Helps them to maintain that very stunning visual appearance, as well as, of course, the resounding sound of the pipes and the drums.
Following the engineers, we can see some of those vital support units. This railway construction company distinguished themselves in France, being able to keep the railways running that could keep the supplies up to the first AIF on the Western Front, and then, of course, maintaining similar transport and support services during the Second World War and subsequent. Behind them was the Royal Australian Army Survey Corps. These were initially engineers, and during the Great War we realised just how significant, how vitally important it was to have good quality maps And in fact, at the Anzac Memorial, our sculptor, George Rayner Hoff, that did all those remarkable works, that the symbolism of the Anzac Memorial was a map maker during the First World War.
And of course we can just see the Royal Australian Signals Association just behind there, led by Major General Paul Irving, former commander of the 2nd Division.
Paul's the previous head of the Royal United Services Institute Library. So,
and we can just glimpse there towards the top right corner of the screen Knox Grammar School, the band there, formed in 1946 by Commissioner William John Mackay. From a group of experienced pipers and drummers, they were serving members of the New South Wales Police, and they adopted the ancient tartan and crest of Clan Mackay. Their motto is Manu 40, which translates to with a strong hand.
Of course, it would be remiss of me not to mention all of our first responders and emergency services personnel who are out on the march today, supporting all of our veterans and our families supporting our veterans today. So a big shout out to our state emergency services, our police, our St John's ambulance volunteers for a sterling job.
I've seen the police and the ambulance all through this morning. You wouldn't have the event here today without them.
This is Knox Grammar School, the band there. And in 2017, the band performed at the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo, representing New South Wales Police Force in the 1,500-strong cast. Again, in October 2019, the band took part in the largest ever production of the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo in Sydney at ANZ Stadium, performing there to more than 100,000 spectators. But of course, a wonderful moment to have them here marching as part of Anzac Day.
It was a
through Sydney.
fantastic show for anyone that was lucky enough to get along to see it.
You do like your pipe bands, eh?
It's one of those unconscious biases you don't realise until you're a little bit older.
And I think we can see there the Royal Australian Regiment Association.
That's right, the famous Skippy badge. And the Royal Australian Regiment's earliest battle honours were won 70 years ago this year, with the Battle of Kap Yong in April 1951 and the Battle of Mariang San in October of that year, one earned by the men of the 3rd Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment. And tragically, one of the last survivor of the Battle of Kap Yong was supposed to be giving the address at the Cambridge RSL this morning, but Perth's in lockdown, so poor old Jack Murphy, a machine gunner from Freddie Gardner's 1 platoon, won't be giving that address. Maybe next year. But you can see each of the battalions, and the Royal Australian Regiment grew to 9 battalions during the war in Vietnam. Each of them has a distinctive colour, and so you can see the colour on their banner as each of the battalions of the Royal Australian Regiment marches past. The 1st Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment, deployed to Vietnam in 1965, coupled with 2 battalions from the American 173rd Airborne Brigade. And then comes the Men in Black, the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment. Went to Korea in '52 to join 3 RAR and earned the Battle Honour Samichon for the Battle of the Hook, the last great battle of the Korean War. Here comes Old Faithful, the green of the 3rd Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment. Of course, a number of their members are wearing cherry berets because they were a parachute battalion in the 90s. First and 3rd Battalions of the Royal Australian Regiment earned the battle honours for their extraordinary service in 1968 in defence of the fire bases Balmoral and Coral. 4 RAR saw its first combat in North Borneo, Kalimantan, during the covert operations against the Indonesians in 1965-66, and then went on to serve 2 tours in South Vietnam. Well, they later converted to commandos and become number 2 Commando Regiment. 5 RAR, the Tiger Battalion. Johnny War took the battalion to Vietnam in 1965-66, and then they went back for a second tour in 69-70, fought the Battle of Bin Ba under Colonel Colin Khan and his DSO.
And there we have the 6th Battalion RAR Association, led by Colonel Ian Mackay.
6 RAR became famous for their Delta Company at the Battle of Long Tan in August 1966.
There they are, Knox Home School again, the band performing there for us. And they had been disbanded until 1989, when there were 22 members, 10 serving police and 12 special constables. When the band's ex-members then reformed in an unofficial capacity for Anzac Day back in 1990 and 91. They celebrated their 70th anniversary in 2016.
7th Battalion marching past now, and again another battalion that did 2 tours in Vietnam, including the legendary Operation Coburg. 8 RAR, the Grey 8. Fought their way into the Long Highs, the first Allied unit to do so since the French had been kicked out.
And there we have the 9th Battalion, led by Sergeant Ross Cogran, retired. And of course, the patron for this battalion is the Honourable General Sir Peter Cosgrove, the previous Governor-General of Australia.
Peter earned his military cross as a platoon commander with 9 RAR during an attack on a Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army bunker complex.
There he is.
After the war in Vietnam, the Royal Australian Regiment was downsized and a number of the battalions were amalgamated. We can see here 5, 7 RAR and spent a lot of their time mechanised. the combination of the 5th Battalion and the 7th Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment.
Of course, we saw that battalion relocate from Holsworthy in New South Wales up to Darwin in 1998.
Vietnam was there's the Special Air Service Regiment Association. The regiment was formed in the late 1950s and saw their first combat against the Indonesians in North Borneo and Claret operations, and then of course served multiple tours in South Vietnam, and the regiment has distinguished itself in every Australian conflict ever since, as well as contributing specialists to peacekeeping operations. The double diamond colour patch of the commando units that were formed in the closing stages of the Second World War from the independent companies that had been designed as stay-behind units, initially in Europe, but famous for their operations against the Japanese. M&Z Commando operated in the Netherlands East Indies in 1945. But their men wearing the green beret of the commandos. Of course, 4 RAR were converted to commandos and rebadged the 2nd Commando Regiment, and saw a great deal of service in Afghanistan.
And here we have the Army aviation elements coming through now.
Some would argue that they're older than the Air Force, considering their legacy began with the Australian Flying Corps in the First World War.
So the Australian Army Aviation Corps was formed in 1968, but as you've said, with a history that goes way back to the First World War.
Have been essential to more recent conflicts, including the Chinooks in Afghanistan and the Black Hawks being deployed on operations throughout the Pacific and into Pakistan as well for disaster relief up there as well. They also provided a reconnaissance capability in South Vietnam during the conflict there.
And there we see the Australian Intelligence Corps Association.
Vital to know what your enemy are doing, and the intelligence provides vital background in any conflict situation so that the infantry, artillery, armoured and other combat units know exactly who they're facing. An increasingly specialised skill.
We have here the New South Wales Fire and Rescue Band starting to make their way through the parade as well. And that band has been directed by Peter Ryan for the past 26 years. He's the band's drum major. And the band members are part-time volunteers. They see it as an integral part of the brigade's mission to provide public education on fire prevention and safety awareness.
They also provide buglers for us at the Anzac Memorial for special occasions, which is a great connection because it's the firemen in Ypres who play the last post at the Menin Gate, and so it's wonderful that the fireys in New South Wales send their buglers up to the Anzac Memorial from time to time. to play the last post at our place.
There is nothing like that sound. And the members there, they raise their own funds through sponsorship to be able to attend international tours. And as well as the Anzac Memorial here in Sydney, they also have performed on international tours across Asia and Europe. Setting quite a pace as well, I can see moving through there.
And of course we can see a number of firefighters wearing honours and awards, not only from their previous military service, but also the response firefighters provide internationally to humanitarian aid and disaster relief operations.
Those deployed emergency services have been incredibly busy in the last 10 years, especially with events such as earthquakes and other storms and other natural disasters throughout the region. I know Defence continues to support and deploy them on operations abroad, but at the end of the day, it's about getting these people where they need to be.
And there we can see the Royal Australian Corps of Transport. The Transport Association today is led by Gary Smith and is one of the longest serving transport units in the Australian Army, having first formed in 1914. It served in World War II and since 1948 has been a CMF and an Army Reserve unit. There we have the Royal Australian Army Ordnance Corps. And of course, without the support of our logisticians, ADF capability would certainly not be as effective as it is on operations. And of course, the motto of the Royal Australian Army Ordnance Corps, to the warrior, his arms.
The symbolism is marvellous. In a lot of the old colonial settlements, you'll see the three guns stacked on each other. And I noticed some on a recent trip to Tasmania that some of the ordnance depots that have been left behind since colonial times and still had that symbol. So it's kind of nice to see that it lives on. It's a bit like the use of some of the mythology in the on current badges, like we're looking at the Royal Australian Electrical and Mechanical Engineers in front of us now, and you can see the...
Now we've got the Castle Hill RSL Pipe Band, and this band was formed back in 1932. It was part of the Epping and District Scottish Society. It's been playing since that time, with the exception of 1942 to 1946, when the band went into recess given a shortage of players. They are the officers in the pipe band are Pipe Major Nick Train and Drum Sergeant John Tate. The tartan they're wearing is Cameron of Iraq. South. Since 2000, the band formed a continuing relationship with Castle Hill RSL, so hence becoming Castle Hill RSL Pipe Band. But while the name has changed, they retain strong ties to the Epping and District Scottish Society. They play at monthly socials and other events. They also have a tuition program with the James Roos Agricultural High School. That's allowed them to re-establish their pipe band and continue to train new members. They currently have about 9 learner pipers and 6 learner drummers.
And of course, just behind Ramey, the fixers of the Army, we have the Australian Army Catering Corps. Now, the Australian Army Catering Corps, there to sustain our men and women of the ADF, was formed in 1943 at the instigation of Sir Stanton Hicks, Colonel Sir Stanton Hicks, an Army medical officer who saw the need to improve the standard of Army food and nutrition for our fighting troops. With the motto, "We sustain."
It's nicely timed because I think I can hear a Douglas Dakota from the Haas collection at Illawarra flying over the city at the moment. Dakota served with the Royal Australian Air Force in many campaigns, but with note in New Guinea as biscuit bombers for those deployed on the Kokoda Trail.
Watching Ramey march past, I thought one of our guides might have been with them, Ryan Tracy. Ryan did his first tour in Timor with Armoured Corps, but went back for a second tour with Ramey, but it's just reminded me he's on duty today, so he won't be marching with his mates.
Of course, and there we have the Royal Australian Army Nursing Corps and my very close friend, Captain Robert Hankel, there with her colleagues marching, led by Major Sarah Winter, who is the officer commanding of the 1st Health Support Company, the 3rd Health Support Battalion.
And that sound you can hear in the background is probably the Caribou and the Neptune from the Haas collection, providing a fly past of Sydney.
Of course, and we see with our nursing colleagues, they are wearing red jackets and grey trousers today, symbolising the traditional grey dress and scarlet capes worn by our nurses up until the end of the Vietnam War.
Fantastic tradition. Glad you pointed that out. You can see it now.
Coming into view are some of the Army Reserve units that date to colonial times, were the days when, after the British withdrew as part of our colonial garrison in 1870, local groups of volunteers were raised to provide a defence capability for the colony of New South Wales. And so you can see there the 17th Infantry Battalion, a proud successor to the Royal New South Wales Regiment that grew out of those first colonial units raised in the colony after the British withdrawal in 1870. They continue the British tradition, and so many of them adopted the British symbolism, like the wearing of kilts and the badges of the various regiments, be they Irish or Scottish, back in the what was then known as the Home Islands. So the New South Wales Scottish coming up fairly shortly. And they see a direct link with the New South Wales Volunteers that deployed to the Sudan, earning their first battle honour, and then of course that long and dreadful war in South Africa, the Second Anglo-Boer War from 1899 to 1902.
And following on from the New South Wales Scottish, we have the Sydney Thistle Highland Pipe Band. Well, there have been, of course, many top-class type pipe bands in Australia, but few have stood the test of time better than Sydney Thistle Highland, which was formed in 1918, and it has the unique distinction of having participated in the Victory March of 1918 and has continued without break since its formation. Now the band wears the farquharson tartan as part of both a traditional full-dress Highland regimental uniform and also a modern-style Scottish walking-out dress.
There's a low drone that you can still hear with our fly past from the Historic Aircraft Restoration Society in the background. I'm pretty sure I can recognise the sound of a caribou there.
And the Sydney Thistle Highland Pipe Band has been participating in every Anzac Day march, apart from, of course, last year's cancellation since its formation, and also provides services for a number of public events, festivals, street parades, sporting events, as well as private engagements. And it prides itself on high standards of presentation as well as its music. Coming behind them, we have the New South Wales Police Pipe Band again making their way through.
You can see in the middle there the NASHOs, the National Servicemen's Association and affiliates. Known as the NASHOs, the contingent represents two periods of national service in Australian history. The earlier period, from the 1950s, saw over 200,000 18-year-olds entering the three branches of the armed forces. They were stationed at centres all over the country.
Australia was the first place to introduce national service in peacetime for anywhere in the British Empire. In 1911 we introduced conscription for 12-year-olds, and they continued through to the 1920s.
I would not want to have had to supervise that group. I reckon they would have had their hands full. The second period of national service lasted from 1965 through till 1972, covering the Vietnam era. Men turning 20 had to register for their birthday ballot. Those with birth dates were selected were required for 2 years of military service in the army before being liable to be sent overseas for combat duty. Some 64,000 young men were called up, with 15,000 sent to Vietnam. Others served in Malaysia, Borneo, Papua New Guinea and here in Australia.
And of course we can see the Parachute Regimental Association New South Wales coming onto our screen now. They're led by Eddie Cudd of the 7th Parachute Regiment. And with our paras in the march today, we have two World War II veterans, Mr. John Morris, Operation Torch in North Africa and Husky in Sicily, and Mr. Jeff Cook, airborne on the Rhine crossing in 1944. These paras are part of the 16 Air Assault Brigade UK Special Forces.
I've timed that nicely because I think that might be another Dakota or Catalina flying over in the background. Hopefully a Dakota for their sake, given their service. They probably would have jumped out of enough of them.
And we can see also the New South Wales Police Pipe Band there. They're coming through again. The band there, of course, has had a lot of duty as well, representing at the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo, and of course also here in Australia when the military tattoo was in Australia in 2019.
And of course, coming into view, we can start to see elements of the Combined British Forces Association.
Yeah, Australians have been part of British forces, well, ever since first European settlement. In fact, the first New South Welshman to be killed in action in Afghanistan was Walter Olivey from Glebe Point Road, who was killed in action on the 27th of July 1880, serving with the Berkshire Regiment. So a long association with Australians of the British forces.
Even in the Second World War, we would have seen a lot of British units in the Pacific serving alongside Australians, both in Australia and throughout the South Pacific and Southeast Asia.
Yes, well, the Combined British Forces Association has proudly marched in Sydney for many years on Anzac Day, and they comprise of ex-servicemen and women from the British Army, Royal Navy, Royal Air Force and the Mercantile Marine. Most members are of British descent, but some Australians, having served with British forces, but all now confirmed in calling Australia home. And there we can see the Indian Defence Force Veterans New South Wales, led by Colonel Joseph Matthews, a former infantry battalion commander.
I believe we have a cheerio for this contingent for Major General Chowdhury, who's watching from home and will celebrate his 101st birthday on the 1st of May. So,
following on from them, we have the New South Wales Ambulance Band. This band was commissioned in 1985, has performed for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II at the opening of Parramatta Stadium. And from 1985 to 2002, that's 18 years, the band performed 276 times in public. Anzac Day, though, is always the culmination of service for the band.
Indians are still on screen, and the 60th Indian Field Ambulance supported 27th Commonwealth Brigade in the Korean War. So again, they're marking 70 years since Indians and Australians served together against the communists in Korea.
many of those Indian units would have served either adjacent or alongside Australian and New Zealand units during the Second World War and other conflicts as well, but that story is just starting to become a little bit better known now.
Right. Bengal Lancers served alongside the Australian Light Horse in Palestine in 1917, so yeah, absolutely.
And then we've got the Maltese Ex-Servicemen's Association on our screen, led by Mr. Charles Misford. The Maltese RSL sub-branch was formed 55 years ago and has been marching on Anzac Day for 46 years. Malta played an important role during the Second World War owing to its closeness to shipping lanes. And we recognise the bravery of the Maltese people during the Siege of Malta and moved the King George VI to award the George Cross to Malta on a collective basis to bear witness to the heroism, the devotion that will long be famous in our history books.
We just missed the Rhodesians, and the RAAF trained in Rhodesia, part of the Empire Air Training Scheme, and now the Sikhs marching past. Of course, the Sikhs served at Anzac alongside the Australian New Zealand Army Corps from 1915, so a worthy addition to any Anzac Day march as a Sikh contingent.
Sikhs today are led by Colonel Charanjit Singh Chima of the Indian Army, retired, marching for the Sikh regiments of World War I and II.
Of course, we can see now the South African Military Veterans Association of Australia, led by Jonathan Just, the Regional Master at Arms. South Africans have fought alongside Australians in 4 major conflicts in the 20th century, including both World Wars and the Korean War. The veterans marching today represent all 4 arms of the Defence Force, Army, Air Force, Navy and the South African Medical Services.
And behind them, you can see the crossed kukris of the Gurkhas, their traditional weapon, the razor-sharp short sword.
And the Gurkhas are known and noted for their bravery and their strength. 4 Gurkha battalions served at Gallipoli. Gurkha Bluff, captured early in the campaign, was named in their honour.
Indeed, they served alongside the New South Wales 13th Battalion in the attack on the Abdul Rahman Spur, and they captured Hill Q on the Sari Bayer Range, one of the battle honours on the wall of the Anzac Memorial.
Just coming along behind the Gurkhas, we can see Clan MacLeod Pipe Band. And it's been participating in annual Anzac Day March since its first outing in 1949. They were then named the Mosman Pipe Band. They celebrated their 70th anniversary in 2018. Marching for legacy. Of course, we acknowledge that they have incredible service, continue to provide incredible service to veterans and families, supporting everybody in their hour of need.
And of course, today we recognise that Legacy supports 48,000 widows, widowers and 1,800 children and dependents with a disability across Australia. On our screen is the Australian World War I descendants, and they're led today by Greg Cowell. This group are direct descendants of those who served in the Australian forces from 1914 to 1918. The Australian World War I descendants were first formed only in 2000 with 10 descendants. The association now has a growing membership with many members marching today, from sons and daughters, nieces and nephews to great-great-great-grandchildren.
Forming up behind them is the 2nd 20th Battalion, another of those 8th Division units that served such gallantry in the Malayan campaign and in the final battles on Singapore Island. Each of the divisions has very distinctive colour patches, and indeed the Australian Army fairly recently adopted a colour patch system itself. So when we see the 2nd 20th, you'll notice the oval with the diamond in the centre of it, the oval indicating the membership of the 8th Australian Division. The diamond was the colour patch of the 2nd Division in the Great War, and the original 20th Battalion was part of the 2nd Australian Division that got to Gallipoli in August 1915.
Of course, listening to the crowd clap throughout this morning, the enthusiasm is certainly not waning.
Some of the descendants continuing to march through. Many of these are descendants of those from the First World War, but will also looking to connect with others who they believe may have a connection with a relative who fought in the First World War.
Signallers going past now, Don R, dispatch riders, and the signals of the 9th Australian Division. And white over blue has always been the symbol of of signallers, and on the background of the T indicates that they're members of the 9th Australian Division.
35th Infantry Battalion, led by Colonel John Armstrong. 35th fought in Madang, Gully, Tappan, Hansa Bay and Wewak. Were there after the end of hostilities with the Japanese.
And of course, what we're seeing now are Allied representatives and their descendants. You can see the US Army Transport Corps, followed by the US Army Small Ships section.
Surprisingly active in recruiting Australians during the Second World War. A number of Torres Strait Islanders served in US small ships in the final campaigns. Gifted boat handlers, they became part of the Americans had no problems encouraging these people to serve in the US Navy and US Army small ships.
We're also seeing come through here now the Burwood RSL Subbranch Pipes and Drums Band. Founded in 2005, many of the pipers and drummers in the band are ex-Australian Army Reserve, most having served at least 15 years, and a number of them for more than 30 years.
I can see coming along are the Tonga Ex-Servicemen Association Sydney. This will be their second year of marching for the association in Sydney. Consists of ex-servicemen from the Army and Navy who served in the Tonga Defence Force, as it was known then. It is now called Her Majesty's Armed Forces. There they are now.
And just behind, we can see the descendants of World War II Chinese Defence Force. This association was formed in 2014 and they've participated in Anzac Day March every year since. Descendants of World War II Chinese Defence Force was formed in 2014 with members from all over and descendants from the World War II Chinese Army, Navy and Air Force who participated in the Sino-Japanese War from 1937 to 1945.
The Australians sent a mission to China, Mission 204, to help advise the nationalist Chinese in their fight against the Japanese in the early stages of the Second World War.
There we can see the Tongan ex-servicemen's contingent. After the Chinese veterans and descendants, we'll see the French war veterans of New South Wales. This contingent is made up of veterans and descendants from the Free French forces in World War II and many post-war conflicts subsequent to then. There are also veterans from peacekeeping missions throughout the world. They were originally formed in July of 1938 by an ex-French serviceman of World War I and French consul in Sydney. After the French, we have the Greek and Crete contingent, led by Evangelos Koumakos. Greek sub-branch has been part of the RSL for over 60 years. Many Greek Australians have served in the Australian Defence Force, including nearly 90 who were at Gallipoli and the Western Front during World War I.
The battles of Greece and Crete in 1941 saw Australian soldiers fight alongside the local population against the invading German army. Many Greek and Cretan families often took fatal risks to shelter soldiers from the Germans.
particularly relevant this year with the 80th anniversary of the Lustre Force campaign, and the 4th and 5th Greek regiments fought alongside the 2nd 1st Battalion from Sydney, and we saw their banner march past some time ago.
We just saw there the United Irish Ex-Services Association, so with a name like ours, I guess I should give a shout out. 30 members are believed to be marching today, comprised of members who served with the Irish forces, as well as Irish descendants who have served within the ADF.
I noticed a Polish cap badge on the chap that just went past, and of course the Poles were part of the Tobruk garrison when the 9th Australian Division held out against the Germans.
And we can see the Serbian Veterans and Descendants Association coming through now. Serbian people were among the first to form resistance against the Nazis in occupied Europe during the Second World War. They often fought as guerrilla forces behind enemy lines and provided safe evacuation for many Allied airmen who had been shot down over Europe.
A number of Australians served with the Serbians against the Austrians in the Great War. Miles Franklin was part of an ambulance unit, and a number of us, women from New South Wales served as medics on the Serbian front during the 1914-18 war.
And on our screen we can see Turkey. Today is an important day for both Australians and Turkish people. In spite of the fierce fighting that occurred at Gallipoli, Australian and Turkish soldiers developed a mutual respect for each other. In the post-war period, many Turks settled in Australia.
Yeah, the Turks and the Australians served alongside each other in Korea, and were planning to celebrate Anzac Day together. And the gold stars and red bars of the flag of the Republic of South Vietnam.
On our screen, we've got the Republic of Vietnam contingent who have marched in this event since 1977. Men and women marching are veterans from the Vietnamese Army who fought alongside Australians and American troops during the Vietnam War. There are an estimated 15,000 Vietnamese veterans from the conflict who now call Australia home. They come from all of the South Vietnamese former forces, the Army, Navy, Air Force and the Marines, and have made a wonderful contribution to Australian culture and prosperity since arriving here. And I believe that's one of the Air League bands coming through at the tail end with the SES contingent.
Yes, and a big shout out to the New South Wales State Emergency Service personnel. Our SES folks have been kept very busy, both here in Sydney, through the storms through New South Wales, and now on Anzac Day.
So the march is now drawing to an end. So many amazing stories have come to light and been waiting to be told, including my colleague at the ABC, Joe McAllister, who made a remarkable discovery about one of his relatives who fought in World War II, and it involved some detective work and a photo. Let's take a look.
Hello, Jay.
Hey, how are you?
Come on in.
This is my cousin Faye. She turns 89 this year and is still going strong.
This is my brother Roy, who went to the Middle East.
Faye's dad died when she was young, so family photos have always been important.
So what's this photo here for?
Yes, this is my father when he came home from the war, a bit thin, but still looking pretty good in his suit.
Yeah, he looks dapper.
I've come to see Faye because of an incredible photo of her dad, Robert George Garner, and the story that goes with it. Robert was an Aboriginal prisoner of war during World War I. He fought alongside his brother Elias McAllister.
This is Uncle Elias.
So it's my great-grandfather.
Yes.
They represented an estimated 1,200 Indigenous servicemen who enlisted.
This is a copy of my father's enlistment form.
5'6".
5'6".
What height are you?
Me?
Yeah.
Probably 5 foot nothing. If that.
Faye didn't know too much about her dad's time on the front line until a Belgian collector, Ian Rufoff, discovered a photo of him taken in Germany in 1917.
This is the album I found in 2015 on an auction website. It contained a lot of pictures, but most of them of French prisoners of war. I was drawn to the photo because it was a photo of an Aboriginal digger. It's very unique because I never saw it before. I saw pictures of Aboriginal diggers, but not as a prisoner of war. The man in the picture, Mr. Garner, he looked also very proud.
The photo of Robert left the family with many questions. So I've come to the Australian War Memorial to see if I can find out more.
He's one of 21 Aboriginal men that were POWs in the First World War. Robert was captured at the First Battle of Bullenkor in April of 1917. Because he's wounded, he gets treated medically and his leg is not in a good condition. He gets put into internment camps in Germany in the end.
Is him in the prisoner of war camp?
In the prisoner of war camp, yes. And there's the name of the camp. He was in so many different camps.
What do you reckon life would have been like in there?
Oh, I reckon it would have been hell. Yes, it wouldn't have been a good place, I'm sure.
We were able to find out just what Robert's life was like in these camps by taking an even closer look at the photo.
Down low on his lower sleeve is where he has his 3 wound stripes.
And these boots, I guess they're civilian boots.
Yeah, that's what it looks like to be, yeah. With like the multi-textured thing now, you've got possibly shiny toe caps with the top part being shiny with normal leather and something else. And being a POW of like the Germans, you could be getting boots off other countries that are in there. So the variations in this image are very interesting, and it's a great portrait of like an Australian soldier.
You know, I'm very lucky.
I knew the photo of Robert was an important piece of our family history, so I wanted to get it back.
Well, I've managed to track down the original photo of your dad, and I've got it here, and I wanted to let you have it.
Oh, my goodness.
That's the original.
That's the original.
Original copy.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes, thank you very much.
So what does it say on the back there?
Just his name and address.
So, R.G. Garner, Hill End, New South Wales, Australia.
Yeah.
Think he would have been worried about his family back home?
Oh, he would have been worried about his family, yes. Yes, he would have been.
How does it feel to finally have the photo back in the family?
Oh, it feels great. Yes, that's wonderful. Yes.
When Robert died, he was buried in an unmarked grave. But after the discovery of the photo, the Department of War Graves awarded him a new commemorative plot and headstone.
It's really nice now, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it looks
Done a
good.
wonderful job. My father, certainly, he deserved it. We'll leave the flowers here for him. Yes, may he rest in peace.
I grew up listening to stories about my great-grandfather and his brother, Bob Garner. Their family story has always been an inspiration to me.
Such a wonderful story.
And it's nice to tell that story in our own words as well.
Yes, that's right, it is. It's very good. And I'm find a place on the wall for that photo, and perhaps one of you as well.
Do you reckon
If you behave yourself.
And that concludes our live telecast of the Sydney Anzac Day March. We'll be taking you back to the ABC newsroom shortly. Later today at 4 p.m, you can also see highlights of the Air Force Centenary event and Fly Past that took place in March this year. And a special half-hour program at 6 p.m, The Art of Remembrance, that examines Australia's war history through the work of war artists. Remember, you can also watch the entire march and other Anzac Day events from around the nation on iView later today. Thank you also to my co-commentators, Brad, Eamon and Georgina, and the production personnel today. Thank you all for joining the telecast, lest we forget.